Can you base an entire cookbook around a single technique? Of course, and today we're going to talk about how to do it and how to do it well. Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. I'm Kate Leahy, and I'm here today with Molly Stevens. Hey, Molly.
Hello, Kate.
You've had a lot of experience writing books based on a single technique. Our guests wrote many books on single techniques, and we're going to get into what makes these projects unique. I mean, for you, what are the challenges of writing a book about a technique versus writing a more general cookbook?
Writing a book around a single technique, to me, it's about teaching that technique is what you're trying to do, because otherwise, why are you doing it? Your hope is that whoever's using your book will learn from it and then be able to go on and use that technique on their own. It's a real teaching forward book, and the way I've done it and the way our guest Camilla will get into has done it, I've seen, is that the technique is really loaded up front in the book. I've done it twice with All About Braising and All About Roasting, and I sometimes joke that you could, if you read the first half of the book, you wouldn't need the second half, which is the recipes. Because if you really read and absorb the basics of the technique, you're then off and running on your own. And then the recipes themselves are just examples of how to use that technique. The other thing from a sort of a more structural standpoint is if you're writing a book, say, All About Roasting, and it has these roasting techniques, you have to put everything up front, because otherwise your recipes are just going to be so repetitive and so full of the same call outs, the same sidebar information. You're going to cut and paste the same information over and over again. So trying to figure out how to balance that. But I think people do run into challenges if you're writing a general cookbook and you repeat a technique. Say there's a chapter on skillet pastas. Do you then put the technique at the beginning of that chapter on skillet pastas and then just, so learning how to write a technique-driven cookbook can be applicable to general cookbooks, but writing a specific technique-driven cookbook is definitely a unique thing.
When you're thinking about a recipe list, I would also imagine that there are certain things that, I love this recipe, but it doesn't highlight the technique enough to justify its existence in this book. I'll have to save it for something else. And that's the thing about these books. They take a lot more work up front to get them right. When they are done right, they can sell for a long time.
Yeah. To me, it's a teaching tool, a technique book. It's if you really want to learn to cook, your cookbook library is going to have books on the basic techniques. You know, they're patient, they're well-researched, they're encouraging, they're rigorous.
They're rigorous in a way that other books don't need to be. That's a really good segue to talking about our guest today, Camilla Wynne. She is very rigorous in everything she does. She's trained as a pastry chef. She's worked in kitchens all over Montreal. She's also an award-winning cookbook author. She's a teacher. She now writes and develops recipes for loads of publications. I'll just name some of them. We have The Guardian, The Washington Post, Globe and Mail, Cherry Bomb, and she also writes for friend of the podcast, Nicola Lamb's delightful Kitchen Projects newsletter.
When she was in Montreal, she had a business called Preservation Society that made jams and jellies and candied fruits as well. And we are bringing her onto the show to talk about her third cookbook that came out in October, and it's called Nature's Candy.
Have you ever candied any fruit?
Some orange peels from time to time.
Yeah. I know. I'm ready to up my game. And this book is going to help me, figure out how to do just that. So let's bring her on. Camilla, thank you so much for being on Everything Cookbooks. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be on my very favorite podcast.
Oh.
A lot of times people are a little bit timid about writing a book that's so technique driven? Or if you do have a book that's really about technique, does it have to be academic or dry? And this book just has this really welcoming, warm voice. The writing is so engaging and it's whimsical, but it's not easy to come up with a book that hits all those spots. But first, let's just talk a little bit about the origin story of this book. We saw that the foreword was written by Tim Mazurek, a food writer in Chicago, and he talks about taking one of your classes in candying. Is that where sort of the idea came up to write a book?
Yeah, basically. So this is my third cookbook, and whenever I finish one, I immediately want to start a new one. So I was trying to come up with a new idea after I wrote Jam Bake, and I had started teaching online classes during the pandemic. I've been teaching preserving classes since 2011, I guess, so a good solid 14 years now. But, I'd been doing the same ones since the pandemic online, jam, pickles, and I wanted to expand my offering. And I do a lot of candied fruit, ever since I started working as a pastry chef. I was candying my own fruit and baking with it. And then I noticed whenever I'd post about it on Instagram, people would be interested in it. So I thought, well, maybe there's enough interest that people want to learn about this online. So I launched a candied fruit class. I couldn't believe how interested people were. Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. And I think one is that there's just not a lot of info on candied fruit around, like you'll get like a recipe for a candied peel, maybe in a pastry book or something like that. But for like a really in-depth look into how to make like the whole candied fruits that you see in French confectioneries and stuff like that, there just wasn't much out there. And so people were really hungry for that knowledge, I think, as well as the fact that there's just candied fruit traditions worldwide. Used to be by necessity, but now just because of tradition and how beautiful it is, it's such a part of so many celebration foods. And so making your own often makes such a difference to how great those foods are. So I think that was a big part of it as well.
Right. I mean, for anyone who's traveled to France or other parts of the world and seen, certainly across Asia, seen some of these, but we don't have a very robust candied fruit culture here.
Yeah.
In North America, I would say it's often, in fact, maligned, unfortunately.
When you were in Montreal, you had something, it was a business called Preservation Society. And it sounds like your starting teaching coincided with the end of that business?
No, actually, it with the beginning.
Okay.
So I started a preserving business in 2011.
I see.
I'd been working in fine dining, and then I left to go on tour with a band for a few years, and I came back and all my friends had become pastry chefs at restaurants and stuff, and I thought the band was going to get back together, but we broke up in Tokyo in 2009, it turned out.
That sounds like a memoir.
I know. There's a story I want to talk
right.
about. Yeah.
I was working for friends, at their restaurants and bakeries in the interim, and I finally realized that the band was over, and so I wanted to start my own thing, but, a pastry shop requires a lot of capital, staff, all of this stuff, and there's a lot of amazing competition in Montreal as well. It's one of the best places for pastry, I think, in North America. So I ended up opening a preserving company called Preservation Society because I could just rent the little kitchen in like a wine importer's office on my own. I started out, and at the time in 2011, canning was not super popular. It was really seen as like an old-fashioned thing. A real boom happened pretty soon after, but I just like totally fallen in love with it back in pastry school around the turn of the century. So I wanted to do something with local foods and something different. And my friend, Natasha Pickowitz, who is also a cookbook author, who was working in Montreal at the time, organizing events at a little cafe, she asked me to teach a class. And thank goodness she did, because it turns out I love teaching way more than I like running a business.
Wow. It's so interesting.
So that's why I started teaching classes. She asked me to do one, and people loved it, and I loved it. And it ended up with me getting so much more education around preserving, just because people were asking so many questions. I was self-taught, so I didn't know the answers to all of them. So I got a lot of extra education, and I think that's the most important thing probably that I bring to my book writing.
You're one of Canada's only master food preservers. What does that mean?
I mean, listen.
It sounds amazing.
It sounds so cool, right? But the reason I'm one of Canada's only ones is because we don't offer the program in Canada. It's a cool program. The idea is that universities like Cornell, for instance, have co-op extensions in agricultural communities where they disseminate like information from research and stuff into communities that actually will use that information. And so master preserving, it depends. It's really different in every state. I did like a 5-day course in Liberty, New York, I think. And it was really cool. And I'm really glad I went. But it's very, very, very focused on home preserving, and it's quite conservative as well. So
is it something where they're focused on here are ways not to kill yourself with home preserves?
Yeah.
And so
Yes.
like avoid botulism.
which is great.
Yeah.
Which is important, but it's less about, I've just always believed that if you understand the why behind all of the rules, then you're far less likely to make errors that can, for instance, be fatal. So there just wasn't enough why in it for me, basically. So I went and got 2 weeks of education at the Institute of Agricultural Technology in Quebec, where I learned from scientists a lot more about what goes on when you're putting fruit and vegetables inside a jar.
Yeah. Which you have then translated for home cooks really beautifully. Your second book was Jam Bake.
Yeah.
I'm curious about pitching and selling a technique-driven book on something. I mean, jam is pretty universal, but candied fruits is yet another level
layer,
of,
right.
of, sort of niche. And that can be challenging. I'm just curious how that went for you.
It's sure. I mean, I'm trying to sell another technique-driven book right now, and it's not going so good so far. So it's definitely a more challenging thing, which I find really interesting, because part of the reason I love to write a technical book is because I think it's really evergreen in a lot of ways. Obviously, a collection of recipes is wonderful, and especially there's added value when there are like essays and things like that. But there's a specific technique that is being taught in a book. It's something that someone is going to come back to over and over and over again, right?
Becomes a reference book.
Right.
Exactly. The goal is to be a reference book, essentially, and really to teach people how they can safely develop their own recipes, basically, like take the technique and then start creating their own stuff. Because I don't know, I take so much joy from writing recipes that, and not everyone does necessarily want to create their own stuff. But I think if you give them the tools to, there are a lot of people that really do want that. So I find it odd in a way that my books are considered so niche, but okay, with the candied fruit, I do get it. That is pretty niche. But at the same time, I mean, I think my big thing when I was pitching is just this doesn't exist at all. There's just so little information about candying fruit, and I can teach so many different techniques. And then I left out a lot of like the traditional celebration foods from my book, because I find people typically have those recipes already that they make every year.
Like a fruitcake?
A fruitcake,
Yeah.
or I don't know, hot cross buns, stuff like that. They've got their recipes. What they need is the technique to make the fruit to put in them that's going to improve them. And so on the recipe, the baking section of my book, I focused more on more innovative ways to candied fruit, or more obscure recipes that could use a comeback, like Nestle rolled pie or Ria l'Impératrice, stuff like that.
The carrot pudding.
Oh, yeah. For me, that's such a comfort food. I grew up eating that.
Right, but rye flour, grated potato. I mean, that's an old-fashioned dessert.
Yeah, it was my grandma's recipe that's in the book. I mean, I added the rye flour and stuff like that.
Okay.
I always like to put my own mark on it, I guess. But yeah, not a lot of people have heard of that, but I wish they would, especially, I mean, in times of austerity, like we're facing or will be facing right now. I don't know. I think it's cool to highlight recipes that use such inexpensive ingredients and turn them into something really special.
When you had your proposal for Nature's Candy, were you able to leverage the interest you found in your cooking classes and your online platform?
Yeah, definitely. I think talking about the success of the online class had a lot to do with convincing my publisher that this book should come out. And, to be fair, like my publisher came on board pretty quickly, which was really cool. But my agent, unfortunately, I was keen to, in Canada, there's not a lot of money in publishing just as an example, I got a $5,000 advance for my first book. Though they paid for the photos, which was awesome. It's kind of like in the UK. That's in Quebec. It's very unusual. When I got the contract for Jambake, I was so excited when I saw the number. And then I realized I read the small print and I was like, oh, wait, I have to pay for photos.
Right.
I was like, oh, never mind. This isn't any money. But so I was interested in bringing my book to an American publisher potentially, but my agent was I've since changed agents, but she was very discouraging about it. And in fact, in the end, I think there are a lot of things wrong in that relationship, but in the end, she convinced me essentially that we couldn't get a better deal anywhere. And it was my first time working with an agent, so I said, okay. But, at the same time, the opportunity to work with my editor from Jambake again was so amazing. We worked together so well. It almost didn't happen. I was assigned another editor because mine was on parental leave. And then the editor I'd been assigned ended up leaving for parental leave before I handed in the manuscript. So I ended up back with my original editor, which was amazing for me.
So you had the same editorial team on Jambake as you did on Nature's Candy.
Yeah, and what a dream. I just love working with Catherine so much.
They're very similar. The structure's similar, the technique up front and then the recipe portion and the...
Right. The recipes using the preserves or using the candied fruit comes second.
I didn't want them to be exactly the same. Like I was adamant that I wanted a different cut size and I didn't want the same, I love the illustrations in Jambake, but I wanted this one to look different. I didn't want them to be so much a part of a series, even though it's true that the concept of a technique and then baking recipes.
That's an interesting choice, Camilla, because a lot of authors and editors, publishers, they like that idea of a companion piece or a second piece. So talk about why you wanted them so different.
I know people love like the same cut size, the same font, the same design, because I think fundamentally they are really different. And also, it was my third book and the first and second look so different, not on purpose. My first book came out in French originally, and it got then sold to an English language publisher in Canada who, once it was removed from me, they made a lot of changes that I would not have approved of if I'd had.
Didn't have control over, shall we say?
Exactly. Yeah. First book, I learned a lot
right.
about what I wanted and didn't want. I just think the techniques are so different. And maybe if I'd done a pickling book next, where it's more about the microbiology of food in a vacuum-packed environment that's shelf-stable, I would have chosen a similar design route. But I just felt like the method's so different here, the history's so different. I just wanted them to really be distinct.
What's funny is because, it really works. And this Nature's Candy has a real glistening, sharp, shiny vibe to it. And to me, candied fruit is that, whereas a jar of jam, homespun illustration is a little bit more in keeping. Did you always know the title of this book? Was it in your proposal?
Oh, yeah. I only have a working title for my new proposal, and I feel like that's like the missing piece. When you get a perfect title, it's like...
It's such a gift.
The sales team tried to change the name of Jambake to Jam and Bake, and I was like, absolutely not. This is the name of this book. Yeah, when you get the title, ooh, what a good feeling.
Yeah.
It's almost like the perfect title can help all the pieces fall into place. Whereas when you're sort of still grappling with the title, it can make it feel like, is this holding together?
Totally.
I'm right now kind of in the process of helping someone write a book, and we're still sort of squishy on the title. And it's so like, what if we can't land the plane?
I know. Sometimes I literally wrote my agent last week and I was like, is my book not selling because the title's not good? I don't know. Maybe that's part of it. I think it's so critical. By contrast, I'm working on a collaborative book with another author for like a small press right now. And the title is like, you just know it when you have it,
Right. That's true. Is that coming out next year or?
In the fall, we're hoping for. It's not for sure, but it's a book about breadcrumbs. My friend and I were both, I don't know if this is true for the two of you, but as a freelancer, I find January just tends to be really pretty blah.
Mm-hmm.
The work's not quite coming in yet. The holidays are over. And so we were looking for something to do together because we love to work together. We've worked in pastry shops and restaurants together. And we just had this idea to write this book. And originally we were going to self-publish it just because, I don't know, it seemed so of the moment, again, with austerity.
Right.
But it's turning out so well that we ended up collaborating with a small press. So I'm really excited.
That's amazing. The timeline for these books is probably so different doing doing a collaboration on a small project with an independent press versus doing one with Appetite, which is an imprint of Random House, and the production that went into this book, just to go into how you actually wrote and developed all these recipes.
And researched.
Yeah. Let's just talk about the historical research. You have a history section before the technique section. It's so well written because it does explain so much about why preserving fruit this way is so traditional. And I really wish I had this book when I was writing a book I wrote called Lavash, which came out in 2019. And I remember trying to figure out the best way. The Middle East, they would have all these preserved fruits that they would serve with tea, and like trying to figure out how they did the quince, like drove me crazy. I wasted so much quince. And if I had this book, I wouldn't have gone into that. But you kind of explain like the long history of candying fruit. And how did you find the materials? Like, how did you find your resources to get those details?
Every time I write a book, the spirit of the staircase, it's all the things you think of after. In this case, the expression is all the things you wish you said on your way down the stairs. But it's all the things after it goes to printer that you're like, ugh. I wrote this book in, I think, 4 months.
Wow.
I write books really fast, and sometimes I haven't had a choice. I wrote my first book in 2 months. And I also had like a small baby at the house at the time. My partner was on parental leave, so I wasn't in charge of taking care of her during the day, but I was at home while the baby was also home. And, I just wish I'd had, man, if I had a budget, I would have traveled to all sorts of places to check out their candied fruit culture and all these things. But I certainly was constrained very much by my budget and time as well. I love that internet, but I started being interested in the history of food probably in the late 90s, I guess. So I've always collected reference books like the La Russe Gastronomique and, Waverley Route or the Oxford Companions. So I always start there whenever I'm working on researching a subject. I get out all those old books or, old Roman cookbooks or things like that, like the Epicus and stuff. So I start there, and I wish in university, I dropped out of university to go to pastry school, and I learned a lot there, but I wish I'd taken some more history classes because I'm so interested always in the history of food. I'd love to have more good historical research principles. But yeah, I start with those kinds of reference books, and then I start, trying to poke around on the internet for, because all those books, when they're English language, they tend to be really centered on Western foodways too, right? So they don't mention, the candied fruit traditions in Vietnam or anything like that. So for those sorts of things, I tend to rely a little bit more on the internet for research, but I just wish I could have worked on that forever and really expanded that portion, in fact.
But you also condense it down to about 1.5 pages or 2 pages. So I think
Yes.
what I'm hearing you say is you would love to do it for just, maybe
an entire
someday. But for what you've provided your readers for this book, it's certainly enough. And the same, on the other hand, the scientific research, you talk about the traditional French methods with the bricks and how you developed a more user-friendly method for home cooks. That had to have taken more than 4 months.
Right.
This is a method you must have developed when you had your business in Montreal.
Yeah, well, I've always dabbled a lot in candied fruit. I owe a lot, I think, to, all of the restaurants I've worked in and all of the pastry shops. There's so many smart people coming up with different ways to do things that are more efficient or less costly and stuff like that, who never get the chance to disseminate that information to the world.
Right. They just figured out a hack to get through service.
Totally. But I think primarily it was my friend Catherine Lepine-Lefrance. She had a confectionery store in Montreal. It's closed now, which is really a shame. But she opened this tiny shop that did handmade like pâte de fruits and candied fruit and marshmallows and all these kind of rare things to find in North America anyway, made by hand especially. And she had gone to the same pastry school as I did, I think, but she did a stage in France where she learned, she mentioned it offhand that they would, instead of doing the steeping and the draining and stuff, they would just add their sugar every day to the pot for candying fruit. And I thought, oh, well, that sounds way easy, because I'm trying to candy like whole pineapples.
Yeah,
Ooh.
go back and talk about the traditional French way of doing it and then the way that you found how to make it work in your book.
Well, it's really fascinating. Unfortunately, I had a great plan. I tried to pitch it to a bunch of magazines to fund it. I was really hoping we would go to Provence for the photos. We ended up only going to Paris, so not bad.
We're going to get into the photos because Molly and I have been drooling over the photos and we're like, these are so stylish.
We're like, she's in Paris. We're like, they're in Paris. Yeah.
We didn't get to, I would love to see it in person, but I've seen videos and stuff. Basically, the process is if you put fruit directly into concentrated sugar syrup, what it's going to do is just like seize on the outside, basically. But water is really attracted to sugar. And so the whole idea is that you want to really slowly draw the water out of the fruit and replace it with sugar, which is going to make it at a high enough concentration, shelf stable, and also get that like translucent quality that's so beautiful. So what they do is often with something that has a more taut skin, like a peach, for instance, they'll prick it all over and then they'll just simmer it enough to open up the cell structure a little bit. And then they start by soaking it in sugar syrup, but a very, very light one. And then they'll take it out, they'll boil the syrup to concentrate it, put it back in. And this can go on for like weeks, essentially. When they're satisfied with the concentration, they let them soak in there for like a few months before they decide that they're properly candied. And then they have these things called a condissoir. So it's like a big vat and it has a little spigot at the end so they can drain the syrup. And then they'll have a tray that the fruit's on inside of it that they can pull out easily with kind of like a mesh bottom so that the syrup drains off it. I had to make my own when I was trying to do old-fashioned candied flowers for the book, and I used my air fryer basket. Works really well, actually.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but like no one's going to do that at home, obviously, right? So I had to figure out something that was much faster and took no special equipment and was much less messy as well.
Clearly, it could go down this rabbit hole of technique and science. But the thing you do in the book, part one is the history and the science and the technique and these master methods without being specific. And then the chart, everything kind of rides on that chart.
Yeah, thank goodness for the chart. That was my editor's idea. I'm a teacher, so I try and convey as much information as possible, but I'm also, a professional cook who relies a lot on ratios and stuff when she works. And I do think that can be quite foreign to a lot of home cooks. So, instead of making the whole book like candied pineapple, 2 cups of pineapple, this many of sugar, I just wanted to have a ratio basically that people could use so that they could candy whatever they had. My editor was like, okay, but they need somewhere where they can find the exact fruit they're thinking of and see what techniques are going to work for it, because not all the techniques work for all fruits. Some of them, with the thick skins would explode if you candied them that way, or some are too fragile. So yeah, she came up with the chart.
Yeah, I mean, it's brilliant because otherwise you'd have like 100 recipes or a zillion, a lot of recipes for here's how you do candied orange. Here's how you do candied cherry. Here's how you do
Yeah, I'd
candied.
just be copy and pasting.
Right. But instead you have these methods. So I come home and I've got, a basket full of strawberries. I go to the chart, figure out what method to do it. But then in the second half of the book, you have got these recipes. And we really want to talk about the recipes. It's more than the second half. It's like 2/3 of the book are these recipes that call for the fruit that we've candied in the first part. Or you can just make the recipes and go buy candied fruit.
That's really important to me. That was the same in jam bake too.
I think it's really important because from what we're talking about, like I could see someone being a little intimidated. Like, I'm not going to make my own candied pineapple, but this stolen pound cake sounds really good. I want to make it. So talk about that.
Well, I don't live in a total dream world, I know that normal people don't have like a ton of candied fruit around. Even me now that I'm done writing a candied fruit book, like when I was writing that book, I had to buy an extra mini fridge for candied fruit. But have those stores ever been depleted, And I'm working on something new, so I don't have time to restock. So I made the terrazzo pound cake from the book over Easter weekend. And I had some candied Sevilles and I had some candied kumquats because citrus season just happened, but it calls for 2 cups of mixed candied fruit. So I just bought some good Australian candied ginger from the store, and I always have a jar of Amarena cherries around. So I used all those, and that was great. So I always want to give people the option of, either omitting the candied fruit entirely or using something store-bought. I just want the book to be maximally useful, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just talk a little bit about the names that you came up with for your recipes. I mean, you have fruitcake cookies. You don't have the classic fruitcake recipe, but a fruitcake cookie, I can automatically kind of think of the sorts of flavors I might get, but the texture is going to be completely different. And it's just like, it's a great kind of play on 2 familiar things. How did you come up with the names of the recipes?
I'd say often when I start a project, especially if I don't have a ton of time to work. I mean, I've always got, I'd say at least a quarter to a third of the recipes already in my back pocket. I mean, as you know, if you write a proposal too, you've already got some of those recipes developed. I'm lucky. The one reason I continue to be able to write books so quickly is just because I have this, I've worked in so many bakeries and restaurants. I've done so much recipe development that I'm just sitting on a lot of possible potential recipes that I can rework.
Yeah. I love the mix of the sort of old fashioned, the new, the novel, a lot of references to things that went before, but new twists on them.
Like ginger, cashew, caramel corn, like that just sounds like automatically kind of like a crowd favorite. But then I also love how you have like a stolen pound cake, because I know stolen is such a project recipe. But if I already have the candied fruit, doing a stolen-esque kind of dessert in a pound cake format, it's not, there's no yeast involved. You can have this. If you have the fruit, it's not going to take you that much effort to put it together. It's a nice mix. And then you also have call outs. Like we talked about, like use the store-bought. Did you always have call outs from the beginning?
Yeah, those were always, they were part of the initial recipes in the proposal for sure. And I think it's because that's something we did in Jam Bake as well, is always have like a way to simplify or a way to substitute, because obviously you're not necessarily going to have that exact jar of jam on hand. So how else can you rework this recipe?
As you said, like make it maximally useful.
Thinking about the recipe testing for this, assuming there were outside testers involved.
This was actually my first time having outside testers.
Oh, wow.
How did that work?
Well, everyone candied their own fruit. I'm really lucky. I was part of an app called Demi that was around during the pandemic, where people would kind of pay a monthly fee to be in a group chat with a chef. And then I'd develop recipes every couple weeks for them and stuff. And so that went bankrupt. But I don't know, we really formed like a sweet group there. And so now we just have a WhatsApp where everyone is in there free of charge. So I just put a call out letting people know that I was writing this book. And, I would love to have a budget to pay a recipe tester, as a recipe tester is one of the jobs that I do professionally. So obviously I think it's important. But, the reality is that most cookbook budgets don't include money for recipe testing. So I'm really lucky that I had a lot of amateur and professional bakers sign up to do one, two, three, maybe four recipes. And it's fun for people, I think, because they get a peek at the book and they're all really great people in my community whose opinions I trust too. So that was awesome. And, I'm a bit of a stubborn Taurus. Sometimes I'd be like, no, I want it to be this way.
Yeah, I like it.
This is fun.
Yeah.
But it was really, really, I feel so much more confident bringing a book to market that many people have already made the recipes successfully from, right?
Yeah, right. Absolutely. And then I would imagine then you have a network of people who are already going to champion the books because they had a role in making it kind of come to fruition. So kind of also works word of mouth that way.
I'm actually so lucky in that way. The book came out while I was on tour with my band.
Wait, the band did get back together?
Yeah, improbably. Yeah, in 2022, we got back together. So I was on tour and the book came out while I was on tour. And so I came home and I had like 2 days off after a 3-week tour to get my book tour together. So a lot of the people who tested recipes for the book actually helped me and made things for the launches, which was really wonderful.
That's great. We have to talk about the design. I mean, it's such I'd said before, it's a beautiful book that the cover alone, the colors, but the photo shoot. I can't imagine what goes into a photo shoot for a book like this. I noticed in the credits that you co-food styled or whatever, you worked on the food styling. So tell us how that all happened.
Well, this one was half in Montreal and half in Paris.
Okay.
So it's the same team I did Jambake with, and I just feel so extremely lucky to work with them. As I said, I really don't get big advances. And, that's cool in a way. Jambake earned out because I only got 12,000 Canadian dollars for it. So
it's so true that what you're saying though, about small advances, like we always talk, you want a bigger advance, but it's true that when they are smaller and you earn out, when you get that royalty check, you do feel really good about yourself and you're not in debt from like a project either. But it's true also that those small advances come with small or non-existent photo budgets. What made sort of Paris and Montreal sort of fit into the budget in a way that maybe shooting in Toronto or somewhere else wouldn't have?
Number one, I'm just so lucky that my co-stylist, Michelle Merrick, and my photographer, Mikhail Bandasak, agreed to work with me for like a very cut rate. And then when I did Nature's Candy and I got twice the advance, I gave them both twice the money. But we did Jambake in 7 consecutive days in a blizzard in Montreal, in like the space above my friend's bakery. It's funny. I think having a really small budget is both a blessing and a curse, because I think we had to be really resourceful and more importantly, really creative. We had to use what we had or use what we could borrow. And, we have a joke among us that there's this like one cup that is in like, I don't know, so many of the pictures, which, if you have a prop stylist, just wouldn't happen. But it's amazing to work so closely. Like, Mikhail was also basically a stylist making the book, and everyone just like one person's cooking, the other person's setting up a shot. Mikhail is taking the photos, but then like we're kind of trading off on everything, really. I was like, this time we're not going to do this in 7 days. Like, that's totally nuts. We're going to break it up into 2. We'll go to Montreal because that's where Michelle and Mikhail live. And I have a great friend who's a stylist there who rented me a studio for half price, that kind of thing. So, and I was like, and then if you get photos in the fall, then you have one set of fruits that are available. And then in this spring, instead of trying to find red currants in November, it's just not possible. But I let Mikhail know, and he was like, well, I don't want to do photos in Montreal in March. It's so cold there then. And I was like, well, yeah, me neither, but you live there. And he was like, no, I moved back to Paris. And I was like, oh, he was like, come to Paris. And I was like, I don't think we can afford that. But I'm very lucky. I have a friend of the family who have an apartment there that they gave to us. And Michelle and I we did it, I think The first shoot was 4 days, and the second shoot in Paris, we actually finished a day early. We did it in 3.
Wow.
Did you bring a lot of fruit in your suitcase to Paris?
You can bet I was just obsessively looking at that air tag. I was like, if this stuff does not get
Right.
to Paris, I am in so much trouble. I actually did forget one thing and had to buy it there and pass it off as my own.
So all the fruit that's in the photographs is all fruit you candied.
Yeah, so I would, there's a lot of work baking everything at the time, and we candied ginger and peel to show the steps, but otherwise I'd candied everything and just brought it with me. I kind of injured my leg hauling my suitcase through the Paris metro on the first day of the shoot because it was so heavy.
I really had thought, I was like, oh, they must have gone to, Fauchon and bought some candied fruit because it's...
Oh, no. It's all... Well, you will see photos from... there's a shop called Verlet in Paris. They do tea and coffee, and then they have like this gorgeous candied fruit display. So the candied fruit in the displays is they so generously let us come in like in the middle of the afternoon rush and take photos.
Wow.
They were so kind and welcoming. I'm really, really grateful to them for that.
What's so lovely about the aesthetics of the book is it doesn't harken back to any one moment in time. It kind of has this effortless, timeless quality to it. Feels like a classic book without feeling dated. It's like a really, really artistic mix. And all the photos too, it seems like there's like a still life aspect. Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
Was there a mood board going into it? Or, I mean, it sounds like you all art directed as a team.
Yeah. So when I went to do Jam Bake, the photos for my first book were done in 2 weekends. With just me and the photographer. So I didn't really know how professional people work. So when I made the plan with Mikael, we didn't know each other as well for the first book. He was like, you need a shot list. You need a list of the shots with the idea. And I was like, So I kind of did that. And to be honest, I didn't learn much after that time. I once again kind of made a shot list because I don't know. I think honestly, there's just so much magic in just seeing what happened and what we came up with. Some things were really hard. The roll cake, we were like so stuck on what to do. And then we ended up like slicing it on an angle and standing it up. Like sometimes even when you have that art direction more organized and you think you have a shot list, it doesn't look good. And so you start having to play around with it and turn things upside down and find a cardboard box to
put a cake on your head.
Basically.
Yeah. How did that shot come together?
We were doing that cake to show the crystallized fruit, and then I probably put it on my head as a joke, and Mikael was like, sit down now. And then people on Instagram loved it. They thought it should be the cover. So,
How did you pick the cover? Describe the cover first for people.
The cover is it's like a 10-inch cake, just iced really simply in white, but that has like a super mosaic of candied fruit on the top. I just thought that it would be the best way to showcase the color and shapes and just the wild variety of candied fruit that's available. And that the cake is styrofoam.
Oh.
We were like, I have 3 to 4 days to do this in Paris. I'm buying a styrofoam cake dummy and packing it. But then we were at the grocery store at the Monoprix in Paris being like, because we thought, we're not going to make a proper buttercream. We'll just get some Crisco and some icing sugar. And the people in the store in Paris were like, I'm sorry, what? You want solid room temperature fat? No, that's not. We were like, gravage style. And they were like, but we don't do that here. So it's just nice Paris butter and some icing sugar.
Wow. You shot it specifically for the cover.
Yeah.
Because it does help to show that there's baking and there's desserts in the book, not only candied fruit. I think if you had beautiful jars of candied fruit, it would tell a very different story of the book.
Yeah, I think it's important to see them as an element of the larger picture of the book, which is the baking.
How involved were you in the graphic design?
Quite involved. I've only done this with the same group of people mostly. But I make like a Pinterest board kind of with the kind of, I have really specific, I love serif fonts and I hate font mixing. I've just got like some pretty specific design ideas. And I knew from like even in the proposal, which was just a Word document, I had the title, all of the letters in different colors. I wanted to really emphasize the rainbowness. So I knew I wanted kind of like a rainbow color palette, but this one actually, it took quite a few rounds for this one to really hit the design. Something clicked with Jambake where it was just like the designer and I understood each other instantly. With this one, it took some more work, but it was cool because my publisher and my editor, they really, really got it. And so everyone was working towards this concept that we had.
It's interesting just listening to you speak, Camilla, because as a pastry chef, I'm like, well, of course she has a very, strong opinion about design, how the way things look. And the book really does have this understated aesthetic. I'm with you on lots of different fonts, but it's one of those things that you might not notice if you're not attuned to it, but you do notice the effect of it. It has this consistency, this elegance to it, really.
It's an elegant book, but it's also accessible. So it's a very interesting way to get that balance.
Thanks. Oh, that's you just said what I want to hear.
There's like smiley faces. Some of the fruit is arranged like the cranberries. I think they're arranged in a silly smiley face, and then there's this very elegant gold foiled pudding in the next page.
I think it's important to be stylish, but not take yourself too seriously. Yeah. Basically, that's what's so fun about baking and all of this stuff is that you're making something beautiful, but it doesn't have to be serious either. That's no fun.
The candied rind on the Amaro blood orange that looks like hair. And I'm like,
hair.
That looks like it's the funniest looking thing. I'm like, but I love it.
No one had stopped me. I would have put a googly eye on that guy.
Yeah.
It would have worked.
Yeah.
So this book came out last fall. You are going to be releasing a book on, you said, breadcrumbs this fall then?
Fingers crossed. Yeah.
Wow. How were you able to do such a timeline that was so short for this book?
There's no photos. I would say that's the big thing. It's shorter too. It's going to be like a kind of paperback thing. Like I collect, like the old Elizabeth David Penguin editions and stuff like that. I love a book that's little tiny illustrations here and there. So we're going for, I know that's not necessarily a popular opinion, but I feel like that stuff is coming back a little bit and I feel like people really appreciate it. And we're going to have a website where there's photos of all of the dishes because I do actually think that's important as well.
I love that. Like those short stack editions. I love those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you have any advice for someone who has a deep expertise in a topic and hopes to create a technique-driven cookbook?
Whoa, what a good question. I think the biggest thing is probably convincing a publisher that the need for that text exists. But I think if you can make it fun and if you can really inject a lot of personality into it, you have a much better chance of finding an audience, like just because it's technical doesn't mean it has to be dry by any means. I just think there's something so special about that kind of book because obviously people do have to be so passionate about something for them to dive so deeply into it. So I think just making sure that a proposal really conveys that is what's most important.
That's good advice.
Well said. Books like this, they can be evergreen.
That's my hope.
Camilla, thank you so much for chatting with us. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys so much and everything you do for all the cookbook lovers in the world. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to today's show. If you have a question, a comment, or a guest suggestion, contact us at everythingcookbooks.com. We rely on listener support, and here are ways to help us keep going. Subscribe to our newsletter at everythingcookbooks.substack.com. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, and leave us a 5-star rating and a review. Order books mentioned on the show through our affiliate page at bookshop.org. Shop our t-shirts, sweatshirts, and other great merch, or buy us a round of coffee. And you can also reach out about advertising on the show or becoming a sponsor. Thank you, as always, to our editor, Abby Cirquitella. And until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.